Hello everyone, welcome to Painting Crafty, and today I'm going to be sharing a craft idea of how to create some Valentine ornaments using some scrap wood that I had out in the shop. I'm going to be showing you a mixed media idea, a painting idea, and some slow stitching that you can add on to make these even a little bit more special. I live in an area where we have lots of winter. I enjoy having the lights of Christmas, and I've often thought, I should really make some sort of Valentine tree or a Valentine garland. So I'm going to start. What am I waiting for? I can't wait to share these ideas with you. Today I'm a part of the What Would You Make collaboration. We have two guests today. We have Brenda with Rustic Lace DIY, Christine with Divine Design, and a guest host, Loli with Loli D's Creation. Now you're going to want to check out those ladies' channels inside of the description box. They're super talented, as well as click that playlist if you too like creating with wood. You're going to want to see what everyone is sharing with their creative ideas. Well, let's get started. I have so much to share with you, and I'm so glad you're taking a little art break with me today. The scrap wood I'm going to be using today is a 1/4 inch thick, and I'm going to be cutting 3 different sizes of hearts. I wanted to create more of this rustic style, so I wanted a longer bottom and a shorter little top. So I drew a cross first and then my shape. The saw I'm going to be using is a scroll saw. I'm most comfortable using this saw because it kind of functions rather like a sewing machine, so it was easier for me to learn how to use. I'm still learning how, but I feel confident in using it. The first DIY heart ornament I wanted to create was one with a raised stencil look. I wanted the background to have a stained wood look, so I added a little water to the wood piece, thinned down my paint, and then painted the front, the sides, and the back. Before the piece dried, I took a damp paper towel and I wiped the paint back, and I thought it created a nice stained look. Gave my piece a little bit of sanding once it was dry, just to smooth it all back down. I wanted to try using some Elmer's glue and a stencil to create a raised look. I put the Elmer's glue on with a foam brush, just pouncing up and down, and it did leave a design, but it wasn't quite as high as I wanted it, so I ended up using a complete different look in the end. But here you can see how I stained over it using some of the Waverly wax to see if the glue would actually show the pattern. It does show, it's just a lot thinner than what I had thought I really wanted. I didn't like it on this one, but I think I'll keep this idea in mind just in case there's a need for wanting a stencil that shows up, that's a little raised, but not too much. But I wanted mine to be a lot stronger design. Since the glue didn't work, I thought I would go ahead and try the matte gel medium. I use this when I use palette art. If I'm just using regular paint, it adds a lot more dimension to your acrylic paint. And it actually worked very well to create this design. I had this stencil that is used for cake decorating, so it's very small. And what I did is I just put the gel medium down on the palette, picking up random colors and just blending them as I went. I even used a little bit of that Waverly wax inside of that medium, and it worked perfectly. The colors are perfect, the texture is just what I wanted, and so I think I'll stick with this if I ever want to do a raised stencil look. I had drilled 2 holes at the top of the heart, one on each side, to be able to go ahead and make an ornament from it. I have a bunch of rusty wire that I wanted to use. I always wear gloves when I'm using real rusted wire because it's a little messy, but it looks great on this little ornament. To add a little bit of a bow to this, I took some fabric that I had dyed with coffee stain, made an awareness ribbon, and then clamped it in the middle, and then just tied it with some jute. I have this little extra key in my stash, and I think I'll add that just as the finishing touch. On to DIY number 2. For this project, I'm going to be using the smallest heart I cut. I wanted it to look like a button in the end, so I had drilled 1 hole in the middle, and then began basically the same painting process that I had with my first one. I'm adding a little shading to the end, and I'm going to be creating a little scene in the middle. I'm starting with the grass. I'm just tapping in some greens with the little edge of my brush, adding in some medium shade greens, some dark greens, and then tapping in a little bit of white just to add a little bit of sparkle to that grass area. Next up on this whimsical scene, I'm going to be adding a little pink house. I was going to do this very simple. I didn't want to add a lot of doors or windows, so I ended up just placing a free-formed heart in the middle. Once I had the heart finished, I used my stylus to add some polka dots to that little pink house. It was a great way to finish off that whimsical look. To add some little fluffy clouds into the sky, I took my brush, watered down a little bit of paint, and just tap, tap, tap those little clouds. Do rounded tops and flat bottoms, and it's going to look like a cloud. I thought this little scene could use a really tall flower off to the side of the house. So I started with a shade of green, kind of medium shade, added a little dark and mixed a little white and created the stem, and then used my stylus to create the blue flower. I love how this little hand-painted wooden button turned out, and it's going to look great in this little mixed media piece I'm going to be building. I'm going to be building a slow stitch project using an embroidery hoop, some random fabric, and that cute button I just painted. This is the beginning stages for how to do a slow stitch project. You're going to be just taking some random fabric and then do a basting stitch to go ahead and baste your fabrics down loosely so we can go ahead and create some stitching patterns on top. If you have never tried slow stitching projects before, it's more about creating textures and patterns and less about creating exact embroidery knots. So this part really suits me fine. I cannot do a lot of stitches. I can go up and down, make X's, and I can do a few French knots, and that is about as fancy as I get. Here I'll slow it down a little bit to show you how I create the steps. First, you pick out your fabric, go ahead and baste it together. Those are those big steps of thread that you see there in black. That's all going to be removed, so it's nice to have a contrasting fabric so you can see where you stitched. I started with some simple up and down straight stitches, a few X's, and that's all I created really. I do like working with an embroidery hoop. It's just a little easier on my hands than holding the fabric all inside of my hand and trying to do the stitching at the same time. So I find these small little embroidery hoops helpful. I always look at my thrift stores for these embroidery hoops. You can often find them there. They're very inexpensive and they really do help my hands. They don't get so tired. Here I'm going to show you my fanciest stitch I know how to do, and that's called a French knot, which really isn't that fancy. But you hold the thread out with a little bit of tension, turn your needle once you have popped it through, and then go down and pull it all the way through. And that's going to create your little French knot. Let's do that one more time and see if I can explain it a little bit better. Come through the back of your fabric, pull it up to the end, take your opposite hand that isn't in the needle, hold it out, spin your needle around about 5 times around that thread. Go ahead and place it back through the hole you just came out and pull your thread. I'm using embroidery floss, about 2 strands. That's about as big as wide as you really want to go. Here we'll do it one more time. Pull it up, pull it out, wrap it around your needle, and stick it back into the hole. And again, this is the fanciest stitch I really know how to do, but I think it does create a fun pattern going back and forth. Even those little simple running stitches and X's make great patterns for these little slow stitch processes. If you've ever thought about trying stitching but want to be simple, this is what you want to try first, or at least I think so anyway. In the end, you just go ahead and make a simple knot in the back, and that's all there is to it. And those running stitches, I pull those out at the end. To attach the button, I used some more embroidery floss, and since I only had one hole, I kind of had to attach it like you would maybe a piece onto a necklace chain. I went through the back and created a loop and then tied a bow in the front. One of the final steps for this piece is to remove that piece of black thread that I used to baste on my item. It's nice to have the contrasting thread so you can see it easily, and I use a needle just to kind of pull and pick the thread wherever it might be. You can see all the little different knots and little stitches I added. I did more crisscrosses, more up and down, and a few of those French knots, and really did add the texture. Now I'm going to be keeping my piece inside of the hoop, but you could take it out and hang it completely differently than how I'm doing mine. Lots of options when it comes to these little free hand stitch pieces. Here I'm going ahead and just making the fabric around my piece smaller so I can fold it in, and I'm going to be stitching all the way around to that piece and gathering it to finish off the back. But before I did that, I did go ahead and add a little bit of glue to that button just to hold it in and make sure it wasn't going to be flipping flopping where I didn't want it to be. So this part, I'm just going to be loosely gathering the back and going up and down and through the fabric with my needle, creating a gathering stitch. Every so often, you stop and pull it a little tighter and gather up that back until it's all completely gathered and will lay flat up against your wall. I'm going to be hanging mine in a tree or a garland, so it doesn't have to be so exact, but if you are hanging it up against a wall, you might want to do a little bit more trimming than what I have done on my piece. I'm still learning about all this stitching stuff. I'm really pretty new to it, and I'm sure I'm still going to be sharing more things in the future with you of how you can finish these pieces better. I wanted to add just a little bit more whimsical nature to this piece, so I took some threads. If you watched before, you know I love to keep the little threads. Added those little bitsies underneath there, took that skewer to push them up underneath there, and I think it looks really cute. You'll have to let me know what you think too. The last heart ornament I'm going to be creating is a mixed media collage piece. I love pasting and ripping paper, and my favorite glue to use is the Liquitex Matte Medium. It's a great layering glue. Anytime you need to have a barrier layer on so you can put a different layer on top, Matte Medium works the best for this process. It doesn't dry sticky, and it's great to be able to layer different items on the top. My favorite papers to use are just simple copy paper is what I like to use because it's very thin and it lays really well and doesn't really wrinkle so much when you're adding these pieces on there. Mixed media is all about the layers. So adding dark, then adding light, and perhaps you're going to add dark after that, or at least I do anyway. So I'm adding a dark edge, and then I'm going to apply some of the Waverly wax on top, and I went ahead and added the dark area, but now I'm taking it off. So again, it's that dance between adding dark, adding light, and then maybe taking it off. Here I'm adding a light layer, and I'm using gesso. Gesso is one of my favorite whites to add onto pieces. It's very translucent, but it leaves just this wonderful cloud of haze over the top of your piece. It's one of my favorite mixed media whites to use. I put this on, and you can see the little cloudiness that it adds, and I give it a dry, and now I'm going to be adding the fabric pieces to this little heart. You can see I added a little bit of the slow stitching element, added some fabric on there, and then now I'm going to be adding just a little bit of pop of red off to the side. When I go to my local thrift stores, I always check the bins where they have the napkins, the doilies, and the little pillowcases. You never know when you might find a piece that has some of these tatting elements or hand little embroidery pieces on them, and if I find them, I always usually take them home with me. Another great area to look is in the children's clothes area. You're not looking for a lot of fabric for these pieces, and often children's clothing has small printed patterns on it and work perfect for these small little projects. To add a little bit of pink, I took a pink button and then layered on a wooden one with a natural color. And then the very top button is going to be red. And I do have a little bit of embroidery floss in there just to tie off my buttons. I like that look of a tied button. Very sweet, right? At the very end, I added a hanger using some jewelry wire. Jewelry wire bends easily usually. I went ahead and created a little hoop and then holded the wire in my hand and then gave the wire a twist. That's just going to lock that little knot on the top and create the perfect little top for this piece. I took the wire and then threaded it through the holes in the back. And then to finish the piece off in the very front, I took a wooden skewer and wrapped the jewelry wire around the wooden skewer to create that curly wired look. I wanted to add a little sparkle to my piece, and I had some jewelry pieces in my stash, so I decided to go ahead and hook one of those little items right on the bottom of that fabric. I thought it was a fun way to add a little bit of sparkle without adding glitter. I love the look. Well, let's take a look at what these Valentine pieces look like hanging with some of the other Christmas items that I have made so far on my channel this year. I think they look pretty cute. I wanted to say a special thank you to Brenda, Christine, and Loli for hosting today's What Would You Make collaboration. You definitely want to take some time, check out their channels, and click that playlist. I'm sure you're going to be inspired to create something with wood with all of the creative ideas that are going to be shared today. If you're new to my channel and you like doing art and crafts, come on over and see what I have to offer. I'd love to have more creative friends join me. Well, thanks for watching, and hopefully you'll come back and join me again. And next time you'll create right along with me.